Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are so excited you are joining us. I hope you are enjoying our car-themed music for our pit stop. We're so excited to see all of you today. It's been a while since we've had the learning session, so we're glad that you're here. Thank you for joining us. This is our action cycle midpoint check-in, our pit stop, and our theme for today is putting the pedal to the metal and really accelerating efforts on supporting people to exit homelessness. My name is Marie Morrison. I'm the director of Built for Zero. And with us today is the whole Built for Zero team here. And you'll also you'll see all of them throughout. And you are also going to have presentations from your peers. We're going to have some interactive activities with your phones. So make sure you have your phones out and ready to go. And Robin, thank you. You're going to be making sure we're on time today. We're going till 3 o'clock Eastern time. We'll make sure we're done at that point. And both Robin and Kat will be joining me in the first part as we get going. So let's get going. I'm going to turn it over to Kat to start us off with the land acknowledgement.
Great, thanks, Marie. Hi, everyone. For those that don't know me, I'm Kat, an improvement advisor with the Built for Zero Canada team. Before we get started, it is important to acknowledge the shared lands that we occupy. I am located in Kingston, Ontario, which is situated on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat, whose presence on these lands continue to this day. Last week on Truth and Reconciliation Day, many of us across the country took time to pause and reflect on the injustices and violence committed against Indigenous people and to honor the lives lost and affected by residential schools. Moving forward, it is important that we keep this focus beyond September 30th, that we continue to make time for reflection, action, and learning so that we can continue on this shared journey toward reconciliation.
Thank you very much, Kat. All right, today attending with us, we have 39 participating Built for Zero communities who are working on ending chronic homelessness or both chronic and veteran homelessness. And you have joined this movement and are here today because you share the belief that we can work together to create a future where homelessness is not inevitable or a way of life, that it is rare overall and brief when it occurs, starting with chronic and veteran homelessness. And the roadmap of this journey, as you know, begins by community setting big, bold, overall aims to end homelessness so that you are clearly identifying your goal, the end state that you're reaching towards, you know, that place off in the distance of the road, and clearly identifying those intentions. But like the overall problem of ending homelessness can be big and it can be overwhelming. So to drive to that destination, we know that we need to take it 1 kilometer at a time. So we break it down into smaller 6-month action cycles of improvement to iteratively learn and respond to the changing road conditions along the way. And so this happens through learning sessions and action cycles. So we are currently in term 2, which runs from November of 2020 till March of 2022. We had our last learning session together in June where you set or reset or revisited those big overall aims and set your action cycle aims. Our next meeting together as a learning session is February 8th and 9th. So that's a long time. So this is our midpoint check-in to kind of refuel and refresh. And we're excited that you're here. So get out your phones. We want you to just sort of check in right now on where you're at, how you're feeling about your work right now. You can scan the URL code. You can go to the website and enter the number, and then you're just typing in a 1 or 2 word answer to create a word cloud. Kat, I'm gonna let you chat it up as you see these coming in.
Awesome, we're seeing great, motivated, exhausting, inspired, so busy. Pumped. Oh, we're seeing lots of busy and excited, inspired, beginning, fabulous, overwhelmed is a big one. Very productive, crazy, optimistic. Seeing great. Seeing fabulous, worried, lost, hopeful, exhausted, excited, and inspired.
I like the person who just put in numbers. Not sure what that means.
I think that's our login code. We're feeling excited about Slido, I think. Productive yet overwhelmed.
I like that busy is our main word here that's coming out of all of this. Busy doing great things.
I love productive but overwhelmed. Like I'm doing a lot, but I'm a little bit overwhelmed. Frustrated, weary, beginning, super pumped in capital letters.
I like that we're seeing lots of busy and overwhelmed, but we're also seeing lots of inspiration, motivation, amazing, hopeful. So exciting to see that balance there. Wonderful. That's a good one.
Our work is urgent and important, so we are busy and working hard at it. Yep.
Innovative. Love that.
I love it. We got a message from Ali. There are so many people here. Of course there are. We're excited. The big midpoint check-in. All right, what do you think? Are we ready to move on? But keep your phones out because there'll be a few other questions coming up as we go along. All right, so we did see busy and overwhelmed, and I think we know you are out there running the race in your communities every day. You're driving yourselves very hard in the work to end homelessness, and we know it can feel lonely sometimes. Sometimes it feels like you're out on the track all on your own, but it can also be frantic. Lots of people around you, lots of activities and action. So we wanted to take this time together really to pause and to take that break from the race. Just take a collective moment together to just pause and think and reconnect with the goals and the energy from the learning session, and to kind of pull off to the side of the track and take that pause and refuel. So that is what we're here for today in our pit stop. We wanted to ask, if you feel like you're in a bit of a traffic jam, what is getting in your way? What is getting in the way of you reaching your goals for your action cycle? How can you overcome these challenges? We're hoping that throughout today you might get some ideas and some inspiration. In fact, there is so much experience across this movement. You know, you do not need to do it alone. You have your peers. Let's leverage that experience and learn from and lean on one another as we go on that journey. And we can also leverage the support of Reaching Home and Veteran Affairs Canada, who are not only partially funding our work, but they are also valued partners and supporters and resource people in our work together. And we also have our other partners and resource people whose expertise and support that we can draw on, and some who are able to join us today. So welcome to those folks. And let's count. Like, if we added up all of our years of experience together, what would that look like? What is our collective experience that we're bringing to bear on the work of ending homelessness? And so we're going to ask you to put that in the chat. So if you can just chat that out, and Kat is going to be our adder, and we're going to reveal that total number to you at the end. So let's, throw in your numbers, and we'll add those up, and we'll come back at the end and let you know sort of what we're working with together. So in terms of our agenda today, we are in the middle of our check-in. We're going to do welcome. We're going to move into some celebrations, and then we are going to have a bit of diagnostics. We're going to look at some of the move-in data across our movement, and we're going to hear from some of your peers who were bright spotting some of the housing-focused work that they are doing. And Chantel is going to lead us through both of those pieces, and then she's going to turn over to Amanda. He's going to take us through some of the mechanics of how we can tune up our systems and approach. And then we're going to hear about testing some updates on PDSAs from Durham region. Very excited about that. And Lisa's going to wrap us up Ashley will do that piece with Durham, and then Lisa is going to wrap us up on the road ahead. So what's coming up next? What can you expect? What should you be paying attention to? And just going to leave you with this word, lollipop. You're going to find out more about what that is at the end. So we are now going to move into celebrating progress of all kinds. And I think there are so many reasons to be excited. And we've just listed some of the federal and provincial kind of things that are going on right now. Multi-billion federal investment in housing, plus a 500 million additional reaching home in the last year. There has been a veteran pilot with a $45 million investment. Housing was a top federal election this year, and really thanks out to all of you. I know many of you were involved in Vote Housing. There was over 200 endorsing organizations, 20,000 individual supporters, 55,000 letters to party leaders and candidates, and this campaign reached over 1.2 million people. There was a national housing debate with all 5 parties represented. It was supported by 17 mayors across the country who represent over 13 million Canadians, along with the BC Urban Mayors Caucus. You might be interested to know that Ontario has committed to by name lists. They have required all 47 service managers across the province to implement a by name list by the end of this calendar year. And the Ontario Alliance has released their 10-point plan to end homelessness and address housing insecurity and poverty in Ontario, and will be embarking on a strategic advocacy campaign in the lead up to the next provincial election, which is happening this spring in Ontario. So the Ontario Alliance really invites and encourages all the Ontario partners and organizations to join them in this effort. Something recently happened as well, the Women's Housing and Homelessness Network conducted a survey with over 500 women and gender diverse people. They just released that report with 10 key challenges and 21 recommendations for transformative change. They're going to be doing some strategic advocacy centering on these findings with the new ministers and mandate letters and speeches from the throne that are going to be coming out shortly. The Federal Housing Advocate, if you're following some of the Right to Housing, will be announced within the next 100 days, and the Canadian Lived Experience Leadership Network is going to be working with the advocate and staff as consultants, and will be providing the advocate with a comprehensive lived experience of homelessness organizational database. And we're going to hear more about, there's been a number of national right to housing developments that have happened. We're going to hear a little bit more from Michelle Biss towards the end of our session today about what's going on there. And yay, national conference is back. It took a pause last year due to COVID, but is coming up on November 3rd and 4th. So just so much there, I think, to be excited about. And of course, within our movement, 27 communities with a by name list, 6 who have reduced chronic homelessness. 1 community who has ended chronic homelessness, and 1 who has ended veteran homelessness. We'll hear more about that. So, I mean, those are some broader things that are going on, but we know there is lots to be excited about in your local communities. And we'd love you to, again, go into your Slido and start listing those out. What's going on in your community that you're excited about?
Okay, we're seeing interagency collaboration, new housing projects, more units. Launched HIFIS 2 days ago, capital investments, expansion to supportive housing, tiny homes. HIFIS is launched and kicking butt. In the chat, we have new shelter build, HIFIS 4.0, new supportive housing, funding for rent subs, more subsidies, permanent supportive housing projects, conversations with health, lots of new housing projects. Again, new supportive housing projects. We're seeing data strategy and system case conferencing. Reduction in homeless numbers, amazing. Collaboration. Also in the chat, we're seeing community-wide commitment to be housing focused. We are seeing community agencies working together in collaboration. Sounds like some themes there. Housing focused shelter, collaboration with research and health, moving to a housing first emergency shelter model. Moving some people off of our BNL into housing units, amazing. Achieved QBNL, congratulations, whoever sent that in, that's amazing. Lots of improvement projects. This week we had a Yukon Housing Summit and a lot of commitment to community partnerships to end homelessness. More community buy-in.
I saw data strategy further back there, like Collaboration, collaboration, exclamation mark.
I'm seeing housing focused shelter and diversion pilots. We're seeing folks that are new to the role, just getting settled, working on a case conference, PDSA, seeing increased staffing, new roles, outreach, shelters. We're seeing a real test of my ability to read really quickly.
All right, keep those coming in. I'm going to keep moving us on, but clearly there is lots happening. There is lots to be excited about. So let's get more excited. We are just going to recognize some of our milestones on our Built for Zero journey to get to real-time data to drive community reductions in our coordinated and improvement efforts and reach and sustain functional zero. We'll start with by name lists. As I mentioned, there are 27 and our newest ones, a big shout out to Fredericton and St. Thomas Elgin for reaching a quality by name list. A big congratulations. Collective cheer. And then I'm not going to go through this in detail, but just there's a sample here of additional data victories. This is a data journey. You're going to get copies of this slide deck and the recording, but we've got 8 communities who are submitting veteran data, 9 who are submitting chronic subpopulation data. We have communities with new and or more complete data. So both on the pathway to a quality by name list, and then once you have one, it is a continued effort around your data. And then communities who are using that data and taking it and now even displaying it publicly. And so Edmonton, Ottawa, Peterborough, and Toronto, some shout outs for your public display of data. Great, amazing work, everyone. Looking at reduce. So we have a new community who has reached the 50% below baseline milestone. A big shout out to Dufferin County. Congratulations, you're a country. You're your own thing. You are making it happen, 50% below. Shout out to you. And so these are our 6 communities who have reached and gone above and beyond that 10% below chronic baseline and our 50% below baseline. So again, a continued effort. Congratulations to these communities for the progress that you're making. And of course, Zero for All, we have our 2 functional zero communities, London for Veteran and Medicine Hat for Chronic. But it's not just about reaching functional zero. Most importantly, it's about sustaining it. And they are doing the hard work right now of sustaining their functional zero. So a big shout out and congratulations to them for those continued efforts. So we're now going to celebrate and gear up into housing move-ins and hear a little bit more specifically about housing move-in data. And I'm going to turn this over to Chantel and I'll give you the slides in just a sec.
All right. Did you give me control there, Marie, or are you going to keep it?
Nope, you got it.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Happy Thursday. If you don't know me, my name is Chantel Perry. I'm an improvement advisor with Built for Zero, and I get the pleasure of breaking down and presenting on the collective impact of our move-in work these past 18 months. The last 18 months have been, as you all know, the most challenging in our world history, probably outside the world wars. And when we think about that, it's really overwhelming. But despite these challenges, you've been steadfast and you've persevered. Many of you have opened and managed new emergency COVID isolation spaces. Many of you have turned those isolation spaces or are about to into bridge housing. You made difficult decisions on how to best use COVID funding in your communities. You made difficult resource allocation decisions. As many other sectors moved home to work, many of you were out in the community or you overseen work in your community. You were keeping people safe and working to get people housed. So we got a little bit curious about the move-in data. And you're going to see that we really do practice what we preach here at Built for Zero. We dug into the data a little bit. So we took a look at the number of move-ins reported from all Built for Zero communities from March 2020 to August 2021. So those were for QBNL communities and those who are working hard to achieve QBNL. So for our chronic move-ins, we had about 25 communities that reported every month. And for our veteran cohort, we had about 3 communities that were reporting move-ins every month. So now for a little bit of fun, I want you to guess in the chat how many move-ins you think Built for Zero communities collectively made happen in the last 18 months. So just to add a little bit of competition, we're going to mail out a Starbucks or a Tim's gift card to the person who gets closest. So let's start seeing those. We've got 900, 1,200, 10,000 from Allie, 1,783, that's very specific. 1,800, 9,000, 12,000. I love the real specific numbers. I hope there's a story behind them. So awesome. Well, let's unveil. So the big number is 10,772. So that is just amazing. We housed for chronic 10,653 people or households, and then for veteran 119 households. So we know that the number of move-ins really don't tell this whole story, and that our bind list data, of course, tells us a lot more. But I think it's really important for us to celebrate over 10,000 move-ins, including over 100 veteran move-ins, because it's an incredible feat during an incredibly difficult year that we all had. I also, I guess, wanted to bring up that when we first started back on the 20,000 homes journey, back in June 2015, we committed as a collective to house 20,000 people over 3.5 years. And, you know, we know that we met and, you know, succeeded that target, but I think we should need to digest and appreciate and celebrate that during a pandemic, Built for Zero communities housed over half of that original goal. So that's amazing. And I don't have any clapping soundtracks like Marie does, but congratulations, everybody. I know that it took really, really hard work. So we want to go a little bit deeper and do a deeper dive and look at some other interesting data points, and then get to the how. How did Built for Zero communities actually achieve some of these amazing move-in numbers? So beyond looking at the number of move-ins that occurred, we also took a look in the last year, so from September 2020 to August 2021, to see what move-in rates looked like. So we wanted to pull and show you how you can slice and view data in a few different ways that allowed us to highlight some community bright spots across Canada. As you know, if you have QB&L, your community's move-in median can be viewed anytime in your own PMT. So the median is the midpoint, and these are top annual leaders in terms of monthly medians. So it's probably no surprise that Toronto leads the pack given their size, but still it's a commendable number at 202 move-ins a month. We also really need to commend Windsor, Essex, Waterloo, and Niagara. They're smaller communities with a fairly high and higher median move-in rates. Next, we looked at per capita. So we sliced the data by population size. Per capita, we divided the median move-in number by the population. So you can see here, Edmonton has the highest per capita move-in rate among Built for Zero's communities. And I spoke to them yesterday to talk about what they were doing and what was the secret sauce there. They talked about how they leveraged their COVID isolation shelter to target vulnerable and health compromised people from their B&L. And they really took advantage of heightened housing engagement resulting from the pandemic. And then they created bridged housing to connect people to Housing First programming. They really credit that bridge housing for stabilizing people and for facilitating some better housing move-in outcomes. And it also helped them to improve diversion and prevention, and improve their partnerships with Alberta Health Services. So that was really, really impressive. Next, we looked at percentage of chronic move-ins from total chronic population. So we looked at the data in terms of what percentage of the chronic population are communities housing every month, month over month. To do it, we took the number of active homeless from the previous month and divided it by the number of move-ins from the current month. So in other words, we figured out of those who were actively homeless last month, what percentage had a move-in the following month. So that's what we're calling our chronic move-in percentage. What we found is that among communities with QB&L, the median chronic move-in rate was 7%. So of the active homeless, chronically homeless population, 7% were being moved in month over month. 12 communities had a median move-in rate that was above that overall median of 7%, and 4 communities actually doubled that move-in rate. For Medicine Hat, it's no surprise that they are moving in, 50% of their chronic population every month because they've reached functional zero. So they have very low chronic numbers. But Fort McMurray, Dufferin, and Chatham-Kent, with Durham closely following behind, are also housing large percentages of their chronic populations month over month. Dufferin is one of the leading communities with a rate of 16%. So in this action cycle, Dufferin focused on their housing move-ins by breaking down the number of move-ins they needed on a monthly basis to reach functional zero by their target date of March 22. So they have been making those targets every month. So well done, Dufferin, for setting targets and meeting them every month on your way to functional zero. And then lastly, we pulled some astronomical data points. So astro points are fairly easy to spot and understand. All of a sudden, you have this wonky month and a huge data spike, and you wonder why. So generally, the points mean one of two things. One, your data is wrong, but we don't really want that to happen. Hopefully, we want it to indicate that something special was going on that month. And as you can see here, these are our top 5 Astro Point communities and the number of move-ins that they've achieved in 1 month. Windsor-Essex is going to talk about theirs in a couple of minutes, but you can see here that Guelph Wellington had 28 move-ins in August, and they're likely to report up to 10 more in September. Many of these move-ins were because of their new permanent supportive housing project, but I think it's important to show and identify that Guelph Wellington has been working really hard to identify housing resources that they need to make in order to get people housed from their BNL data. So they have consistent move-in numbers month after month, and that really can kind of point to system stability. If you have any questions about these data points or calculations, please reach out to your improvement advisor who'd be happy to walk you through how we came up with some of these numbers. So we do have 2 communities here today to talk just for a few minutes about their pandemic move-in rate experience. And we'll have some time for a question or two after both presentations. Windsor will speak to their astronomical point of 52 move-ins in March 2020. And the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo out of Fort McMurray will speak to how they leverage a pandemic and the double whammy of a major flood to improve their move-in rates. So with a monthly median move-in of 32, a per capita rate of 9, and a steep astronomical point of 52, I'd like to welcome Kelly Goss, Manager of Homelessness and Housing Support, Michelle Prue, City of Windsor Program Development Officer, and Colm Holmes, Coordinator with Windsor-Essex Housing Connections, to talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Chantal. Hi, everybody. Long time no see. we're here to talk about the astronomical point of 52 that we were able to attain in March 2021. And I will tell you and start off to say that our wheels had actually fallen off in March of 2021. What was happening in our community was that we had an outbreak declared in our emergency shelter system, which propelled us to travel along the Autobahn. We were implementing and working with our isolation and recovery centers, starting up overflow IRCs. Our health unit had ordered a shelter to be closed. We had converted a recreation center in 3 days to be an emergency shelter, developed policies, procedures, constructed barriers, etc. We were planning and implementing the 2021 point in time count and planning and implementing mass vaccines at that time. So just to give you context with the urgency that was happening in our community that helped drive us there. In addition to supporting folks who were required to isolate or were positive for COVID-19, we were seeing increased partnerships and opportunities with community partners that we hadn't seen before. And those partnerships have really helped us start on a journey to really talk about overall systems change and how we deliver supports to people experiencing homelessness in our community. And special thanks to our teammates in and out of our community who sent in care packages equipped with coffee and Red Bull and lots of candy and sugar. We couldn't have done it with all of those people surrounding us and helping us through that and really pushing us to let us know what was possible and that we were doing what we needed to do to keep people safe. I'm going to turn it over to Colin to talk a little bit more specifically about what the teams had done to try to get those huge housing move-ins.
Hello, everyone. So I do just have some notes. I just need to bring it up here. Sorry, my computer's acting a little bit slow on me, but just give me 1 second, okay? Okay, I'm all set. I do apologize about that. So, as mentioned, obviously we were kind of dealing with quite a bit come March. So in general, we needed as it is here on the screen, we needed to shift the community mindset to a response, a community response, and not have agencies with caseloads feeling that, they need to house their clients, but also a community that we kind of have a shared caseload of all people experiencing homelessness and really have the mentality of an us and not so much a we, right? So that was a huge shift. And I think that requires a tone setting, right? So somebody being able to set that tone and someone being able to really shift that sense of, we need this for our agency to move forward to we need this as a community and we need this in order to move forward and get as many people housed as quickly as possible during an outbreak, during the closure of a shelter where there was a lot of forces working against us. And so that can get contagious once you start to, really see results. So I think once results started to roll in, people saw that there was an ability to be part of something that would result in impact for people in a real time or real life level, right? So ultimately, we needed people to leave that kind of agency mindset at the door and work collectively as a community. And that really was an effective way, but it does take a little bit of work initially, right? Around explaining to people that this is going to have impact on the people you support, and this is going to work well for, ending people's experiences of homelessness that are working with your organizations. So some of that shift in that mindset required us to leverage resources. So what that meant was agencies didn't have to hold on so tightly to resources that they had, but could share them as in the community so that everyone as a group could have more outcome. So whether that resource was an available unit, whether that resource was beds, whether that resource was, rent bank or helping people, get payments made, whatever resources there were, it really was rolling up your sleeves, putting those resources on the table for the benefit of the people in our community. So really shifting the mindset to the client is the focus, and it's not really important what agency they're attached to. We're looking to get them out of chronic homelessness. One piece, what we really did was, as I mentioned, kind of a shared caseload. Was what we did was we did weekly meetings that really formulated off of kind of the Housing First, the way Housing First teams meet. And so it was daily, my apologies. And we would run through the lists of people that were impacted by everything that was going on in our community. And we would see where we're at with those folks as a community. And then we would, provide resources and solutions as a group so that people didn't feel like a heavy amount of work was falling on one agency, but the community as a whole was going to work together for positive results for the people in our communities. We would look at removing barriers. We would look at, highlighting issues that we were facing. We would really problem solve. And so as the days and then the weeks into this month specifically went on, you started to notice more and more people buying into that. And that really proved results, right? It provided results for us as a community. And obviously 52 individuals had their experiences of homelessness ended during that period. And it was a testament to the collaboration of folks and the agencies really and truly not trying so much to worry about who's getting an updated house stat or who's getting this, but as a group, we are more powerful together.
That warms my heart. That just does. Thank you for that. Is Michelle want to speak a little bit about how you're keeping the drive curious and how you're investigating the differences between your supported and self-resolved, Kelly, or?
Sure, I'm here. I
great.
apologize. I'm at work today and I do not have a camera on my desktop, so I'm sorry about that. And if you hear some background noise, I apologize about that as well. We're at half staff, but people are having a party back here. So, it's good that they're happy, but sometimes. Okay, so as Kelly and Cullum already explained, we were able to obtain that astronomical point of 52 move-ins because those teams came together. But what I wanted to really explain is that not only were they busy with everything else that we have already talked about, they still made the by names list a priority and they sent in their updates regularly. We will not be able to brag about our 52 move-ins if the agencies were not still providing that information to us on a regular basis. With training and constant reminders, our community has become a front runner when it comes to providing these updates on time. With a little more data diving, we discovered that approximately 40 out of the 52 housed were self-resolved, which surprised us a little bit. We do know that we are making some changes with the way the data is coming in. So some of these 40 could have been supported already, but maybe those updates had not come in already. But this is just an approximate number. The next steps in our community will be to complete interviews with those who have lived experience with homelessness to find out the why, the what, and the how of their success so that moving forward, we can incorporate these details within the supports we provide already. So moving forward, we're hoping to get some feedback from these individuals that are able to self-resolve or in order to just better, improvement projects along the way, make our services better in the end as well. So my pun for the day is there are no speed limits on the road to success.
Thank you very much for that, Michelle, and Kelly and Colm as well. Excellent work, excellent. So now we will turn it over to, just trying to switch my slide here. There, oh, I went too far. Bear with me. Here we go. We're going to move to Fort McMurray now. So with a median move-in rate of 19%, per capita rate of 9, and a June 2020 Astro point of 19, I'd like to welcome Heidi Major, Social Program Advisor with the Regional Municipality of Wood Buffalo out of Fort McMurray.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to pull up my information.
Welcome, Heidi. We're happy to have you here today.
Thank you. So on April 27th, 2020, up to 15,000 Fort McMurray residents were forced to leave their homes due to our annual river ice breakup, which caused the lower town site of our community to flood. The Regional Municipality of Wood Buffalo worked with agencies to locate and provide supports to residents, rough sleepers, and 62 of our funded program participants who predominantly were living in the downtown core where the services are. So this was all, of course, during COVID as well. It was a priority to locate these individuals to ensure that they were safe and they were evacuated from the flood zones. So most of this data is coming at you from my colleague, Kate Evans, because I was one of the people who was evacuated as well. So she sends her regrets that she couldn't be here today. But so having achieved what was considered a quality BNL, We quickly jumped on using the BNL as a way of locating unhoused individuals who were deemed missing after the flood. From there, we immediately recognized that we needed to expand our reach with other community connections to find individuals on our BNL, as well as those who were housed through our funded programs. Luckily, our community has an extensive list of service providers on the pre-existing consent forms. So we were able to look to the agency access points and other pre-approved service providers to physically find individuals who had minimal to no contact since the flood. The regional municipality of Wood Buffalo worked with centralized intake, Alberta Health Services, community policing, and the agencies that checked in 4 to 5 times a day to locate and stay in communication with individuals. Due to the increased community collaboration during COVID and the flood, the access points and centralized intakes were able to better locate and connect with individuals on the BNL. Because of this, they were able to identify who was still in need of housing supports, who now needed supports because of the flood, and those who were no longer in need. So a full in-depth assessment of active versus inactive participants was reviewed. With this newly assessed and updated list, coupled with the increased buy-in across more access points, the centralized intake was able to locate, prepare, and transfer individuals into housing programs much faster. Within a few weeks after COVID started and the flood happened, our team had spread our reach far enough to connect with all agencies in the community who were connection points with the homeless sector. Expanding regular communication from just 4 or 5 funded agencies out to 15 plus service providers who began meeting and reporting data on a weekly basis. So our plan for the long haul, the incremental funding that was received under Canada's COVID-19 economic response to support people experiencing a risk of homelessness, with that funding, a diversion program was set up as to support shelter and COVID isolation center users. The development of the diversion program was the silver lining in the middle of this pandemic and our flood, as the program only became a reality due to the expected increase in shelter usage. With the remaining funding, all allocations were given to fund agencies for COVID PPE, to existing rapid rehousing and outreach programs to support the expected need in those programs during and after COVID. The support was provided to the programs in order to look after long-term effects of COVID and the flood, to look after the long-term effects of the COVID and the flood on the community. The increase in supports for rapid housing and outreach and the creation of the diversion program was able to provide those with lesser needs or a quick fix or lighter touch. We couldn't decide on the wording we wanted there, to support individuals who may be new or recently returning to homelessness to mitigate any long-term intensive case management and housing requirements. And that is it for us.
Thanks, Heidi. Thank you very much for giving us that information. I think what I found really critical, I guess, is that both communities here had some common points. You know, we heard about sense of urgency, and as we've all heard before, a sense of urgency can and really will move mountains. And it's critical to ending homelessness. Unfortunately, the pandemic made everything urgent, but at least homelessness now is at that forefront. We heard a lot about key mindsets and mission focused and failing forward. You didn't have all the answers, but together as a collective, you literally, made housing and housing move-ins a priority over everything else. And that's not easy when you're literally in constant crisis mode. And then lastly, I heard from both of you that when we add partners and improve communication, that success follows. So moving on, I know we had wanted to leave some time for questions, but we're pretty much at our time limit. I think what we can do is provide everybody's contact information for Heidi, Kelly, Michelle, and Colm if communities would like to reach out and learn more about what they had to say. So Marie, if I could get you to advance the slide there. I lost control during our little technical mishap.
Breakdown. Yeah, that's great.
One thing I would like to add to the point that wasn't in the notes was that we had a group of individuals who had just graduated from college, and they had all gone to school together, but they were all working at different agencies, and they were used to collaborating and sharing resources while they were in class, and they continued that when they were working with community agencies. And that collaboration amongst the funded agencies really helped support that community buy-in that Colin spoke about. So that's another common thread that we found in our community as well.
Great, thank you.
I was, if I could just ask Chantel, the presenters, because everyone's like, you know, there's no housing. Like, is there lots of housing? Is housing affordable in your community right now? Kelly?
No, not at all. Our rental rates have increased over 27% in about the last 2 to 3 years. So it's not affordable, but like Michelle had said, we're still trying to dive in. People are still self-resolving their instance of homelessness. People are making it work, and we really have to lean in and learn from folks that are able to do it so that we can take those learnings and apply it in agencies. And that's really our next step, because like Michelle had said, you know, the majority of folks self-resolve their own instance of homelessness. It wasn't because of a unit that was available to the table or to the BNL, but we need to really understand what we don't know. And that's the only way that we can really accelerate the housing movements, in my opinion.
And we found the same situation here with the downturn in the economy and the lower oil prices. We continue to have the highest rental rates in all of Alberta, next to Canmore, which is a resort town. So we're not seeing affordable housing at all, and that continues to be a major issue for our community.
Great. Problem solving through that.
Thank you. Kelly, Michelle, Colm, and Heidi, thank you very much. And back to you, Marie.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I'm going to flip to the next slide, but I think, Amanda, you should have remote control if you want to check that out. I think that's you, and you might still be on mute if you're trying to chat.
Thanks so much, Marie. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Amanda DeFalco. I'm the Deputy Director here at Built for Zero, and I get the privilege of working with all of these amazing folks each and every day. And you get to work with them too through Improvement Advisor work. So I'm happy to see all your wonderful faces. We know that the need for more affordable housing is a very common theme. We hear it all the time. We need more affordable housing. But what we don't always know is how much more, for whom, and the type of housing that's actually needed. But using your by name list data, we can dig in really deep and show you how to collect and use these key metrics to understand any gaps in your housing resources, whether those are case management spaces, actual units, and/or housing subsidies. And you can take that information to plan, measure, test change ideas, strategize, advocate to grow and improve your housing options in your community for reducing and ending chronic and veteran homelessness. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of an activity today that's going to help to kind of clear up how you can do that with regards to your by name list data. But what I'd like to do is start by just asking you to pause for a moment and reflect on this particular question. And the question is, do you have a clear understanding of how people experiencing homelessness in your community get housed? So is it well documented? Is it communicated to all involved? Is the process transparent? Can people experiencing homelessness navigate the steps easily? Are frontline staff empowered to break through systemic barriers that are causing delays in access to any housing in your community available? I'm just going to ask you to keep that in mind as we walk through this exercise today. And also, just as a friendly reminder, you've got lots of tools in your toolbox. I'm just going to share a couple with you today. You know that in your performance management tracker, pulling data from your by name list, we are tracking move-ins as one of the 6 indicators that you're reporting in or submitting into us. And that's available in your change packages. And this represents the number of people leaving your system and moving off of your by name list due to permanent housing or due to housing. And it's recorded by monthly move-ins. So this means that the person's no longer homeless because they are housed. What does housed mean? Well, there's some clear definitions that we use in this sector around housing, but there's sometimes some nuances around what that means. And so just wanted to clarify that what we mean by housing is based on the Canadian definition, but also there's some other ways that you can ask this question as well. So for example, when people are staying with family and friends, or they're in transitional programs, we have a few key factors that we ask to determine whether or not you would consider them housing. So for example, do they have their own key? Is there no time limit on the amount of length of stay that they could remain in that particular living situation? Is it sustainable? Is it safe? And most importantly, do the people experiencing homelessness consider themselves to be housed in that situation?
Amanda, just so you know, you haven't taken control, you haven't accepted control of the mouse. So I think you're moving your mouse, but not. The slides weren't advancing, but you just advanced the last one. So maybe you're okay. I'll let you know if we're not seeing what you're talking about.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I am seeing that it's, the mouse is not working.
Oh, you're flipping screens.
Yeah, I can't actually see the slide button. I'm just pressing on the slide, but it's not allowing me. Yeah. Sorry about this, folks. I'm just going to try to go back to where we were. All right, the last tool I'll just remind people of is your provider participation tool, which is also located in your change package. This also, we've just added some things in here in case you haven't noticed that allows you to be able to more specifically track your housing resources, whether that's a case management space, a physical unit, or subsidies. And so just highlighted here this new section, and we encourage all of you to fill that out or at least start filling it out so that you can get a better sense of what housing resources are available to people on your by name list. So I'm not going to go into detail today, but if you have any questions, you can follow up with your improvement advisor. So I'm going to take us on a road trip today to the community of Mountain View. And we're going to use Mountain View community data to walk through a specific example of how you can maximize your housing move-in and strategize using your data on your by name list. There was a similar scenario that was shared during our June learning session. And so I'm going to ask Robin to just share the link in there of that recording. We're not going to go into as much detail today. But if you want to know more, you can certainly check that recording out. And if you didn't attend or if you did attend the learning session and you've heard this a little bit before, I encourage you to share any learnings that you have, or if you've tested anything in your community in the chat. And if you haven't yet, hopefully this sparks some new ideas for you to lead into your data. So let's check out Mountain View's homelessness data. So let's imagine Mountain View community has a total of 300 people experiencing homelessness in their community. And we'll break that down even further based on those that are chronic, not chronic, and potentially even those at risk. And so you can see here, we've broken those numbers out. So there are 90 individuals, for example, who are experiencing chronic homelessness homelessness on their by name list. We also can see that we further break it out one more time by looking at the acuity levels. So you can see here the chronic numbers and the non-chronic and even at the at-risk have been broken out based on acuity. So for example, out of the 90 chronically homeless individuals on their by name list, 68 of those individuals have high levels of acuity. Now I'm using acuity and chronicity as an indicator of how those populations are assigned particular housing resources. Communities have many different ways of prioritizing access to certain housing resources. And so this is just a basic example, probably some of the more common examples that communities are using right now in their own community, but it's whatever makes sense for your community, how your community is set up to identify the eligibility for certain program types. So just a reminder, we're just going to focus on the acuity and chronicity today for the purpose of the Mountain View exercise. Let's take it one step further and now look at Mountain View's community housing resources. So community housing resources, again, just as a reminder, can mean case management spaces, it can mean actual physical units, or it could even mean housing subsidies. So let's take a look here and we see we've broken it down, focusing on housing subsidies and case management spaces in Mountain View. I'm going to hone in on intensive case management to help you understand this data a little bit further. And so you can see here that Mountain View has 5 intensive case managers with a caseload ratio of 1 to 20. So that means each case manager can work with up to 20 households at any given time. So when we multiply the 20 caseloads by the 5 intensive case managers, that's 100 caseloads in the community that's available for people who may need intensive case management. We want to go one step further and also look at the rate of turnover. So how long are those case management spots filled for? And let's imagine that on average, those case management spaces are filled for an average length of time of 2 years in that community. So that means that the space is filled during that 2-year time on average. If we divide the total number of spaces available by the average turnover rate, we get an estimate of available spaces per year, which is 50. So we can see here that the average time is 2 years, and then that means that throughout the year, there are 50 case management spaces that could come up. These are just estimations. If you have more dynamic indicators that you can include based on what data you're collecting, dive into those details and add them. For example, some programs track the length, the number of people who pass away per year in their program. You could add that indicator or factor in. It sounds dismal, but it's really to help understand what is available in your community every year. So you can continue to do this exercise with all of your case management spaces, with your housing units and your subsidies. So how many people can Mountain View house off of the by name list with their housing resources per year on average? Well, it depends. Each of your housing resources is independent of one another. Then it's 155, which is basically adding up all of the available units per year by running through that exercise I showed you through the intensive case management example. But some communities, programs work in tandem. So for example, some intensive case management caseloads may have housing subsidies that are attached. If they're attached to the program above, you'll need to decide which of the 155 case management spaces are allocated towards those 20 subsidies. So if they're in tandem, you can't count them twice. So just keep that in mind. So you can start to see how the process of housing basically starts to get really complicated when we're looking at available resources, right? So let's try to simplify some of this. Let's take a look at the next section, which now start to combine this information together. So we're bringing the acuity and chronicity data together with the housing resource data. Remember from the previous slide that the intensive case managers had 50 spaces available per year to assign, right? So let's break that down one step further to determine how the 50 spaces are assigned based on Mountain View's indicators for matching. So in this case, it's chronicity and acuity. And as you might recall, there were 68 households on the binding list in Mountain View that were chronically homeless with high acuity and 18 households that were chronic with mid acuity. So let's say that 40 spaces are assigned to people who are chronic with moderate levels of acuity, and 10 spaces are assigned to chronic with high acuity, which brings us to the total of 50 available spaces per year. So what observations can you make about Mountain View's housing resources based on need? You know, this is where you start to ask yourself, what are you seeing? Does it line up with what you're intending to do? For example, sometimes communities have really intensive case management, and those are precious resources because they're quite limited. But perhaps those particular housing resources aren't targeting the target population that has intended, or maybe it's written down in a contract, but in reality, it's not quite working out that way. And so this allows you to kind of unpack some of that. So certainly this could also be used for advocacy tools in the long term, but let's talk about what immediate steps can start to happen. So you can very clearly see here that the number of housing resources for chronic and high acuity is not really matching the level of need right now. So when you look at the number of spaces available compared to the number of people who are on your binding list, and you could take an average looking over the course of a year if you'd like, or you can look at your most recent data. It's completely up to you. But as we know, there are 68 households that are chronic with high acuity in Mountain View and 18 households who are chronic with mid acuity. And we have, for chronic high acuity, 42 potential spaces per year for that population group, but we have 68 households. So we can see very clearly here that there's a deficit of that particular resource. So it's going to be very difficult for that community to be able to effectively match people at the rate needed to make a reduction. When we look at the chronic mid acuity, there are 18 households, but whoa, there are 93 resources, housing resources that could be dedicated per year to this particular population group. So as a midterm or immediate strategy, what we can start to do is look at the existing resources that Mountain View has right now and start to figure out how we can reassign some of those resources based on community need. So let's take a look at how that could happen. Apologies, Marie, would you be able to bring it back by one slide?
Go back or forward?
Back one more, please. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So when you look at the Mountain View data and you want to readjust resources based on community needs, but to minimize that deficit, right? So we had 68 chronically high acute individuals that need supports per year, but we only had a maximum of 42 resources. That leaves us with a deficit of 26. So we're missing basically 26 housing resources for that target population group per year. What if we started looking at the moderate acuity, knowing that those are in excess? So we have only 18 households that would need that type of support per year, a housing resource per year, and we have 93. So that's quite a big difference. And this actually came from close to a real community example. So you never know until you start digging into this data whether that's happening in your community or not. So let's imagine that Mountain View decides to pull the permanent supportive housing resource dedicated to moderate acuity and moves it to the high acute folks. So now 100%, we're moving all the permanent supportive housing up to serve only chronic high acute individuals. So let's see what that looks like. So now you can see the permanent housing. There's now 20 permanent housing spots and 0 permanent housing, 20 permanent housing spots for chronic and 0 for the moderate acute. Let's say that they can keep going. What if they also said for assertive community treatment caseload spots, we're going to move all of those to the high acute as well. And so they keep running through this exercise until they get to a point where all of the most intensive resources have been reallocated. They're still at a deficit of 18, so they've moved all of their intensive case or all of the sort of community treatment, all of the permanent supported housing, and they're still at a deficit of 18. So here's where the difficult community conversations tend to happen, right? Does Mountain View triage based on the assumption that people are better off remaining homeless until the ideal intervention is available for them? Or should they triage based on the next best thing? Let's assume that to mitigate temporarily while they're advocating for more resources, they decide that they're going to do the next best thing, which is allocating a proportion of their intensive case management to the highly acute, high chronic population. And they don't need all of them, they need a proportion of them to basically remove that deficit that's still remaining, which is we still have 18 spots that we need available for highly acute, high chronic individuals per year. So they remove 18 spaces from intensive case management for mid-acuity and put that into the dedicated housing resources for highly acute. And this is what it looks like once they've done that. Sorry, Marie, one more. Yeah, thank you. So you can see here that they now have a deficit of 0. They've fully allocated, reshifted their resources to ensure that the high chronic, highly acute individuals have enough resources per year, and they still have an excess of resources for chronic moderate acuity. So they may want to continue to have conversations to figure out where else could those 67 resources be dedicated towards. Maybe it's changing the type or nature of support that they provide. Maybe it's going to a different target population. So totally up to community how they do that. But this is just one example of how you can dig into your data on your by name list and looking at that housing resource inventory in your provider participation tool to start making really targeted decisions based on what's needed in your community. You may have also noticed that we didn't talk about any additional funding or any new capital in this exercise. And not to say that you have an abundance everywhere, but we're going to encourage you to have a mindset of abundance over scarcity in these situations. And there's definitely opportunity to work as a community to figure out how to fill these deficits using your data. I'd like to leave you with some other ideas of how you could lean into some of this data and help to increase your move-ins while you're waiting for more builds, more affordable housing. There's still a lot more that you can do. So here's just a couple of different examples. You can break down your data to figure out who is getting housed and how are they getting housed. Scale that up. Who's not getting housed and why, to figure out, do you have to remove any bottlenecks within your processes? You can replicate the overachievers, dig in and figure out which case workers or housing workers are having really successful and high move-in rates every month, and figure out what they're doing differently than some of the others and replicate that practice over the course of the different programs. You could have a 100-day move-in challenge. So set monthly target move-in rates together as a community and report those out. One community developed a thermometer where they would track the success of the community and share that out in an email every week with frontline staff. You could look at your average time between the point of referral and the point of move-in and see if you could reduce the number of days that it takes based on removing any processes that might be getting in the way. Investigate and track self-resolution for inactives. We heard from Windsor that there were some people who were self-resolving. Lean into why that is and how they're doing that successfully and replicate. Identify and remove process bottlenecks. Access to available housing, is eligibility not clear, for example, and start to build that into your practice. And sometimes it's just about rearranging the order of steps to get housing, people into housing faster. You could do things in parallel while people are waiting through the process. So I hope this helped you, inspired you to think about how to get really clear about not just more affordable housing, but what type of housing resource is actually needed and for which target group, so that you can be really strategic and leaning into using evidence to inform your decision making. If you want to know more, you can certainly reach out to your IAs. We are always here and super happy and excited to help you lean in and learn. I'm going to now pass it over to Ashley.
Thanks so much, Amanda, and thanks for walking through that example and that exercise. So much information that we can pull out using your by name list data to drive that information. So thank you so much for that. Hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Ashley Vandermark. I'm one of the improvement advisors with the Built for Zero team, and really excited to be coming into this pit stop for a tune-up. It is time to tune up those improvement engines and figure out how we really lean into move-ins. So I want to just take a little bit of time and draw a picture with you. I don't know if we have any artists on the line today. If we do, then I apologize for the really primitive drawings, but bear with me here. Just go with me on this. We have a car and we're driving along the road.
Donnie. I would just Donnie.
Oh, there we go. Got a mute. There we go. We have a car and it's driving along the road. Let's just say,
bring that up. Maybe this was.
Let's just say that this road is tree covered. Really nice greenery in the background. Maybe there's some mountains. Maybe we're out west. And we have a beautiful sun. It is just the perfect weather for a great road trip. I'm sure many of you would love to take this road trip with me. We have a map in hand, the destination on the horizon, and we are ready to cruise. But as we're driving, we start to smell smoke. And when we realize this, we pull over and we realize that our back tire is on fire. So we jump out, we grab a fire extinguisher, and we do our best to get the fire out as soon as possible. And we're feeling pretty confident. And so we're about to get back in the car, and then all of a sudden, another fire. We see it in the corner of our eye is on the hood of the car. And so there we go with our fire extinguisher again to try and put out this fire. And just as we think that we are getting to the root of it, all of a sudden, another fire pops up and another fire pops up. And then before we know it, the whole car is engulfed in flames. And then we take a step back and we think, okay, we just need to get these fires under control, and then we can figure out what is happening with this car. But before we have a chance to do that, all of a sudden, fires start popping up everywhere. The trees are on fire, the road is on fire, everything we can imagine, things that we didn't think could burn are on fire. And then it just feels like everything is on fire. And we are a lone firefighter trying to fight this on our own. We know there's a cause. We know there's a solution because of the cause, but it's so hard to step away when everything feels like it's on fire, to step away and focus on the strategy. I'm sure, and I'm reflecting back on the word diagram that we created at the beginning of this pit stop. I'm feeling like some of you are feeling what I'm saying right now, that maybe you feel like this lone firefighter standing in front of a wall of fire. And it's feeling impossible. It's feeling like it's insurmountable. And how do we focus on strategy when we have all of these fires to put out, that we just keep jumping from fire to fire to fire? And you might feel lost and feel overwhelmed with the immensity and the heat. Well, we hope that through this pit stop, you're taking nuggets to link back to the strategy, link back to the mission, and what a meaningful solution is. Because our mission hasn't changed. The mission is still the same. There we go. Get people housed and end homelessness. Oh, my slides are going crazy here. Let's try and go back. I'm giving it all away here.
There we go. The mission hasn't changed. The pandemic has changed how we work, but the mission itself has not changed. Get people housed and end homelessness. So how do we get back to that mission? How do we put down the fire extinguisher and take a couple moments to step back and look at the bigger picture and lean into those solutions that we know are going to have an impact versus those knee-jerk reactions when that fire erupts? How do we look at the strategy and stay focused on that end game of getting people housed and ending homelessness? Today is a celebration. It's a pit stop to refuel you, but it's also a celebration of the incredible work that you have been doing despite being a firefighter and despite the hundreds of fires that you are continually facing every day, despite a global pandemic and natural disasters that are hitting so many of you across the country, even as we speak. We celebrate all of the people that have been housed. You have ended homelessness for so many individuals. You've stayed focused on the mission. And today is about celebrating that, but it's also about recognizing that it's really hard. And we know that it's really hard. And we stand behind you in that, trying to continually support you to stay focused on that mission. In order to help refuel that tank and really allow you to get inspired again about the mission and staying housing focused, I'm super excited to introduce some of the members of the Durham Region team this afternoon to join us and talk about how they have stayed housing focused during such unprecedented times. They have leaned into improvement science to understand their move-ins, and then they've acted on what they've learned in their data to see if they can have an impact on move-ins. So I want to welcome Aaron and Alex and Monica. And I also want to give a shout out to the other Durham team members who I believe are on the call, Doreen, Matanis, and Stephanie. This team has been doing incredible work, and I'm so excited that they have been willing to share today with you all the work that's been happening in their region. So first off, I just want to make sure that they're able to unmute themselves if you want to say hi and just make sure that the tech is working for us.
Hello.
Hello.
Perfect. I got 3 hellos. That means you're all ready. Awesome. Okay. Well, if you can just start us off and just tell us a little bit about Durham Region for those who are not familiar with your community.
Sure, I can kick us off. So hi, everybody. My name is Erin. I am in Durham Region. I think oftentimes Durham Region gets confused with Durham County. So we are part of the GTA just east of Toronto. We're a 2-tier area municipality, so the region of Durham, and then we have 8 municipalities here. Our population is about 650,000, I think, now. And then just a bit of background about our Built for Zero journey. So we joined the Built for Zero campaign and the team, I think, back in 2019. And then we did a lot of talking with not a whole lot of action. So for about a year, we just talked about the importance of having a by name list and a coordinated access system, but we weren't really making any progress. And then when the pandemic happened, we, our very small team, decided that we can't sit around at the table talking anymore. We have to actually just start doing things. So I think we had made the decision in May of 2020 that we were going to implement our by name list, and we achieved our QBNL in July of 2020. And then a few months after that, in October, we achieved our quality coordinated access system. And currently, our last month of data, we have 177 folks who are on our by name list here in Durham. And if I'm remembering correctly, 93 of those people are experiencing chronic homelessness. So that's us in a nutshell.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for sharing, Erin. And I just wanted to highlight something that you just said there. You were talking and talking, and we realized we couldn't talk anymore, so we did it. It's that bias towards action and knowing that we need to act. We can't just sit and spin our wheels. And so And because of that, you were able to achieve milestones like a quality by name list, and now using that data to mobilize even further and continue that action. So that's great. Thanks for highlighting that. All right, I'm going to flip us forward, and I'd love to hear about the original PDSA cycle that you folks did. You decided that improvement science was something you wanted to try. And so I want to remind folks on the call, we have 3 main questions when we talk about the improvement project and improvement science. It's what are we trying to accomplish? What's our aim statement? How are we going to know a change is an improvement? So what measurements are we going to use? And then what changes can we make that will result in an improvement? So I'm wondering if you can share for us, what was that first cycle like for data collection for you?
Sure, so I'll go ahead with that one. So hi everyone, my name is Monica and I'm the homelessness data coordinator here in Durham. So we started our first move-in cycle about 5 months after our by name list was fully operationalized. And the primary goal of the cycle was to increase our monthly move-ins. That being said, we decided we will know if the change we have made is an improvement, is if there is an increase in our move-ins from previous months. So to complete this move-in cycle, we relied primarily on our by name list data. So our by name list was in Excel at the time. We looked at all of the individuals who have been housed in the 3-month period between August 2020 and October 2020. So just some of the main questions we wanted answered in regards to our PDSA were what type of housing individuals were moving into, who housed them, how many were attached to programs and supports, the length of time from being added to the BNL to being housed, as well as some demographic related questions. So who were these individuals? What was their gender? What was their age, etc. So we identified 3 key takeaways from the cycle. So firstly, we learned that in general, people did not wait long on the by name list. So this was encouraging for us to see, especially considering the wait times that we've seen on other wait lists. Secondly, most housing opportunities that were becoming available were for single adults. And thirdly, the majority of the individuals housed were female, which was reflective of the housing opportunities that were available at that time and at the beginning of operationalizing our by name list. So we found that we were able to answer many of the questions that we posed at the beginning of our PDSA. However, we were in agreement that it would be helpful to actually learn a little bit more and dig a little bit deeper into our move-ins. So that being said, the change we made that will result in an improvement is to follow up with the agencies who are having the most successful housing outcomes to get a better idea of what is and isn't working. So that essentially led us to start our second move-in cycle, which I'll turn it over to Alex to speak a little bit more about.
Yeah, so as Monica mentioned, we wanted to do a bit of a deeper dive into the data after the first cycle. So we had more months of data at this point. So we wanted to know if what we were seeing was consistent over time, or if it would change with those additional months of data. And we also had some changes to our system. So we had added some new access points and more housing opportunities. So we started by asking some of those same questions as our first cycle. So we looked at the demographic information, length of time on the by name list, that sort of thing. But we did want to gather that qualitative data as well to fill in the gaps that couldn't be answered just from our by name list stats. So from the first cycle, we had identified 3 access point agencies who were having a lot of success with housing people from the by name list. And we asked them a consistent set of questions. So this included things like what type of housing they were having success with, what was working well in the system, and what could be improved on. And then we sorted the responses into some common themes to kind of decide on what types of changes we could test moving forward. So some of the themes for improvement were things like the need for increased communication between agencies, the need for more partnerships and engagement with landlords, and the need for more outflow opportunities to be attached to the by name list. And so we had a few outcomes from this cycle. One was identifying 9 clients specifically who had increased support needs and wanted to get a better understanding of what they needed in order to be successfully housed and what success looked like for this group, and also what we could be doing better. And then we also implemented an action-oriented case conferencing table to increase that collaboration between agencies. And we also looked at implementing new landlord engagement specialist positions. But one change that came out that we're going to kind of focus on that we chose for the next cycle was that increased communication and information sharing between agencies. So we decided to test starting to have Housing First community of practice calls among Durham region with any Housing First agencies so that they could kind of share those tips and tricks. So that leads into that next move-in cycle for us.
Okay, so this brings us to testing our idea. So there's a few different things that we're testing right now. But one of the things that Alex mentioned that we're testing is we've started a Housing First community of practice call. And so there are some of the Housing First teams here in Durham that have been doing Housing First work for many, many years and very strictly follow the Housing First fidelity model. So we wanted to bring them together with the newer teams to share tips and tricks and do some mentorship with some of the newer teams about Housing First and how it works. Some of the things that we're going over is how to engage with people who may not want to engage with you. So when you get matched with somebody from the by name list, how do you really do that engagement effectively? How to shorten the time between getting matched with a client from our by name list and actually being able to move them into housing. So all of those things, and also building capacity. So some of the newer teams were having some challenges with some folks on our by name list who they were matched with who had very high support needs. So having that community of practice call where they can ask questions from other and potentially more experienced Housing First case managers so far has been really helpful. And then, so that's what we're trying to accomplish is to, again, increase the information sharing, kind of mentorship and building capacity within that part of our outflow system. And then we'll know a change is an improvement if the Housing First model in Durham is successful at housing clients and helping them stay housed. So again, having that high retention rate. And then another thing that we're testing there is shortening the time. So from the time a client is matched to a Housing First case manager to them actually being housed. And that's, I think, all I have for that.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for walking us through those cycles. And I just wanted to highlight in those first two cycles, you identified it as a team that we don't actually know what changes we need to make in our system that are going to result in improvement. So we really need to dig into our data to understand. And not only did you dig into your by name list data, but you took it that step further to talk to people and understand what's working, what's not working, where are people getting housed, where are we running into challenges, and use that to inform what are we going to do next. And so in doing that, the idea that you're testing these community of practice calls are embedded in data, and it's embedded in what is happening in your community and responding to an actual need, which is amazing. And I think sometimes we struggle with how do we turn that data into action? And I think how you've done this has really exemplified how you can do that really easily if we're really, really leaning into and getting to the bottom of what are the challenges and what are the needs being identified in our community. So thank you so much for walking through that. I'm sure that people on the call may have questions for this, but we're going to have Erin, Monica, and Alex will have their contact information for you. This is not the only improvement work that you are doing. I just wanted to say that because you've really leaned into improvement science. This is not the only improvement work that you're doing. Why have you leaned in so much? Why have you decided to take on other PDSAs? Why is this helping at the local level?
So there's a couple of key points that we wanted to highlight here. So firstly, improvement science helps us dig into our data and understand what is happening in our community from a qualitative perspective, as opposed to exclusively a quantitative data perspective. So none of us are renowned data experts or have an extensive data background, but all of us did find PDSAs to be a very straightforward way to collect and understand our data and then test a change through pre-identified steps. Improvement science also helps us determine whether or not our current initiatives are having the impact we want. If not, it helps us narrow down what it is that we need to do to get better. At the Region of Durham, we also embrace a fail-forward mentality. So we're not afraid of testing and trying out new ideas. And improvement science allows us to do this because it makes it possible to test those new ideas on a small scale, see what is or isn't working, and from there make larger policy or procedure changes as needed. As likely is the case with many other communities here today, we do have a very small team. So as much as we would love to do everything and test everything, it just isn't feasible. So PDSAs have been extremely helpful as they help us identify where to focus our time and efforts. And then finally, again, like all of us here probably, we are looking to continuously improve. Our coordinated access system is still relatively new. So we've only had our by name list operationalized since July 2020. And we've had QBNL for less than a year. So being adaptable, being able to make data-driven changes and working on continuous improvements with input from community partners is very important to us as we continue to learn and grow.
I think too, one of the things I would add to that, and I'm certain Durham is not unique, in that there's a lot of attention on homelessness. Homelessness has become more visible, probably in your communities, much like it has in ours. There's definitely renewed attention on homelessness, and having PDSA cycles helps us to very transparently go back to our community to explain what we're working on and why we're working on those things in a period of time where everybody wants to pull you in a different direction. And oftentimes those are kind of those knee-jerk emergency responses that people want implemented, and having these PDSA cycles and using improvement science helps you go back to why you're doing this work and use the data from your by name list to kind of explain that back. So we found that really helpful over the last few months.
That is such a great point, Erin. I'm so happy that you raised it. Something that resonates to me when you talked about that fail forward mentality and being a smaller team, and you mitigate risk, right? When we're doing a testing cycle, it's a much less risky move versus making a sweeping policy decision. When you are really, really scaling it down, you lessen that risk. And then with the data, you understand, is this actually having the impact? And then you can scale up accordingly. But it really lessens the risk when you're just testing on a small scale. Thank you so much for sharing your whys. I think it's really helpful for folks to hear why this has had such an impact. I already said it. I'm going to say it again. Move-ins are not the only thing that you're focusing on. I just want everyone to take a look at this slide. These are just some of the PDSA cycles and improvement projects that this team is working on right now. What is up? What's happening next for Durham Region? What can people look forward to hearing about in the coming weeks from Durham Region?
Yeah, so we have a lot of PDSAs on the go right now. So in terms of newly identified, that's really just us wanting to get a better understanding of where people are coming from who are being added to the by name list, why they're experiencing homelessness, that sort of thing. We can see our inflow numbers really easily, but getting down to the why is really important for us. In terms of the move to inactive, we're working on testing a new infographic that's going to have some frequently asked questions about the by name list to just really try to increase community understanding and that transparency around the by name list. We're also monitoring our shift from our by name list. It used to be on Excel, and now it's on HIFIS as of July. So we're hoping that this will also help with keeping clients up to date since our access points don't have that double entry to do anymore. And we're working on a new street outreach strategy as well with the help of ORCode and a working group for that. In terms of the return from housing, we started monitoring months that are kind of outliers for that data point. We had a couple months that had kind of spiked in numbers. So we started to dive into why people were in the return from housing category and what we could be doing to better support them. And one of those things included potentially bringing their name forward to our new case conferencing table. So that's something that we're continuing to monitor on an ongoing basis. And then we have our move-in cycle. So as we mentioned, we're currently testing those Housing First community of practice calls. We've also been testing a new prioritization criteria since earlier this year to try to increase our chronic move-ins by making chronicity the top priority for all populations when we're sending names for an outflow opportunity. So we're going to be revisiting that in a month or so because we'll have about 6 months of data to kind of look at there. And then lastly, we're in our the beginning stages of starting to review our outflow inventory and comparing this to our actively homeless population to see how those resources are currently allocated versus how they should be allocated and to identify where the gaps are in the system. So we're actually modeling it off of that example that Amanda just showed. So we're trying to do that in our community to see what we could be doing better in terms of like reallocating those resources. So yeah. Those are some of the PDSAs we're currently working on.
The key word in there is just some, which, I mean, this is such a big this is such a big chunk of work, and we know it's only probably a small piece of your portfolios, but you really have just leaned into improvement and really leaned into your data to understand what do we need to do in order to have an impact, and then measuring if we're actually having that impact. So kudos to you all, and thank you so much for sharing. If you have any questions, these slides are going to be posted, so you can get the contacts for Erin, Monica, or Alex, or please feel free to reach out to your improvement advisor and we will get you connected with this incredible team. Thank you so much, folks. I am so happy that you were able to jump on the call today and share, but also just so grateful for your dedication and your unwavering commitment to ending homelessness in Durham Region. It's a pleasure to be on this journey with you, and I'm so excited to see where you land at the next learning session in the coming months as you continue to work towards functional zero. So thank you so much. And I am going to throw things back to Lisa for our final fuel up.
Thank you so much, Ashley, and thank you, Durham team, for coming on and talking about your PDSAs. So exciting to hear about. So I would like to first remind folks why we're here. There we go. Sorry, just having some issues with the slides. So we are in the midway point of the action cycle, and I want to remind you that the finish line is our February learning session. So we're in the middle of driving towards those aims that we set all the way back in June, and what we're working towards is the February learning session. And so at the February learning session, we will be creating an intentional and interactive space for communities to come together to both learn as well as plan what projects and what work plan they would like to enact in order to meet new aims for the next action cycle. And so if you haven't done so already, mark your calendars, save the date. You will not want to miss this. Our learning session is on February 8th and February 9th from 12 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So mark your calendars if you haven't done so already, and we look forward to seeing you there. What to expect at the learning session? It will be held virtually, just like the June one, but key difference is that we will be integrating time with your local team to plan your action cycle into February 8th and 9th. So it won't actually be a separate session like we did back in June. The time that you have with your team to set an aim statement, to identify improvement projects will take place during the learning session on February 8th and 9th. Just a few key updates here. We are nearing the end of term 2, which will end in March of next year. And so we'd like to provide just a little bit of information about re-upping your participation in Built for Zero for the next term. So the next term will be similar to the last. It will span for 2 years, and we'll start a sign-up process for that in November. Participation costs will remain the same as last time. And if you have any questions about re-upping your participation in Built for Zero, please reach out to Marie. Also, two very exciting updates related to data and your PMT, or your performance measurement tracker, in your change package. The first is that all communities, and not just by name list communities, will have the ability to submit and review and analyze chronic aged in data. So we'll start this in November. So when you are going back to submit October data, you're able to also submit chronic aged in data if you're able and interested. The second update around data is that we will be testing the collection and use of all homelessness data, not just chronic data, with a few communities during this action cycle. And so if that interests you, if that piques your interest, reach out to Randolyn at caeh.ca. Or if you forget who to reach out to your IA and we'd be happy to connect you further. Now I am getting into the juicy part. I want to talk about all of the great work that has been happening just up into this midpoint of the action cycle. We already have so much going on across the movement, and we're only halfway through. So I want to remind communities that if you have not set an aim statement for the action cycle, it is never too late. Your IA or improvement advisor would be happy to help you set an aim statement and lead that community conversation. But as you can see here, most communities have an aim statement that they're driving towards. And several of these communities have actually already met their aim for the action cycle, which is incredible. If you set an aim statement that only spanned to the midpoint of the action cycle, we ask that you revisit that aim so that you can set it to the end of the action cycle, which is the end of January, since we're coming back together again during the February learning session. And I am even more excited. I get more excited with every slide that I show, but there was a total of 57 PDSA cycles identified since the June learning session. 57. So this means that you guys aren't pulling out of the race because there's bumps in the road. You're not saying we can't end homelessness. It means that you've identified 57 ideas of things that you can change and test to see if it improves your system response to support your goal in ending chronic or veteran homelessness. 57 ideas for improvement. That is incredible. 43 of those PDSAs are still running, and 10 of those PDSAs have been completed. The communities have gone through the P, the D, the S, and the A. And so I am going to read out some PDSAs that are happening in communities, and I'll ask you to please honk if you like what you're hearing. And by that, I mean, put it in the chat, or I think you're able to use reaction buttons, either or, if you particularly like one that you hear. And if I don't read a PDSA that's happening in your community, but you're super fueled up about it, then feel free to pop that in the chat so we can also see what improvement projects you're working on. So Niagara, Peel, and Waterloo are all doing PDSAs related to action-oriented case conferencing. So all three of those communities are really digging in and learning more about how their housing process looks and aiming to increase move-ins for specific subpopulations on their by name lists. Both Guelph, Wellington, and Fredericton are focused on increasing move-ins through landlord engagement, which is really awesome. They're really digging into those private market units and seeing how they can increase housing stock in their communities. Red Deer is doing a data collection cycle on moves to inactive to better understand what's happening when somebody's moving to inactive when the reason is unknown. And Lambden just finished their first PDSA cycle that they've ever done on diversion and the application of diversion. So everybody give a shout out to Lambden in the chat for quickly running through their first cycle. Stratford Perth St. Mary's and Dufferin are both doing PDSAs or starting PDSAs on document readiness with the goal to accelerate move-ins or to move people into housing faster than they currently are. And last but certainly not least, Fort McMurray is testing a moving on program to continue to offer light touch supports to folks once they graduate from intensive case management so that they can increase capacity on intensive case management caseloads. So thank you so much for all of the communities that are continuing their improvement efforts. It is no small feat to be able to decide what you're going to lead in your community, so that is just amazing. I just want to quickly also give an overview of where the current 43 PDSAs are on the track. And so most PDSAs are in this first leg of the race. Most PDSAs are in the planning stage. You're still fine-tuning the details. You might not have revisited the idea since a couple months ago. And so this is your sign to really gas up, to ask yourself, what would it take to get to the next part of the track? Try your best not to spend too much time on the nitty-gritty details of planning. It is very important to think through what you're going to test, what you want to learn, but also at the same time, favor that bias for action. Just get moving on an idea that you thought would be a good one to lean into when your team came together back in June. And so based on this data around PDSAs, I have 3 challenges for both IAs and communities. So IAs, let's up our ante on supporting communities to lead their improvement efforts, and communities, build on what you're already doing and continue to really drive improvement science in your communities. So the first is that those new communities that did not identify any PDSAs, think of an idea. Even if you don't really get past the planning stage, between now and February, think of something, bring your local team together and think of an idea of what you can do to improve your system. If we did that, it would mean that we had 70 ideas for improvement, 70 ideas of ways we can move forward on the journey of ending chronic and veteran homelessness in the action cycle as a whole. The second challenge is to advance cycle progress by getting all 28 that are in the plan stage or the do stage beyond. And the last is to complete all 15 cycles that are in the D, the S, or the A stage. Let's wrap those up if we can before the end of this action cycle so that you can determine the best way to move forward after January. Earlier on in our presentation, we asked you to put in the chat the total number of years that you worked in this sector. And I am so excited to report that we have 667 years collectively as a movement in this field. 667 years. I'm very happy that it wasn't 666. It would be a little bit too spooky around Halloween, but that this really means that we have over 600 years, close to 700 years of collective experience. It means that we have strong peers that we can lean on, that we can continue to talk about how we're ending homelessness and learn from. And if anyone is going to end homelessness, guess who it's going to be? It's going to be us. If anyone has the experience, the mindset, the motivation to end homelessness, the experience to put towards it, it's us. It's you and I, it's all of the communities on the call. So congratulations on continuing to show up every day in this fight to end homelessness. And we look forward to getting there together in the near future. And so now I want to talk a little bit about the lollipop person. So we introduced lollipop in the beginning, and you might be asking, like, what does that really mean? So we did a little bit of research, just a little bit on NASCAR, and we found out that the lollipop person is the person at the pit stop who sends everybody off back onto the track. They're saying, you're good to go, driver, you have all the fuel you need, everything's tuned up. You're ready to get back into the race. And so we have decided to invite our lollipop person on the call to send communities off ready to go to continue their work. And that lollipop person is Michelle Viss from the National Right to Housing Network. And so without further ado, I will pass it over to Michelle.
Hi, everyone. What a wonderful introduction. I've never been described as a lollipop person, but now I think that's how I'm going to identify myself for every presentation. I'm joining here from the National Right to Housing Network. I'm joining this session from the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe here in the city of Ottawa. And I am so pleased to join this session and join my incredible colleagues at the Built for Zero team and you folks who are working in communities really pushing this work along to end homelessness. I have the total privilege to learn from my colleagues at Built for Zero and collaborate all the time. And I've heard through the grapevine that there have been 10,000 move-ins during COVID. Is that right? 10,000 or sorry, yeah, 10,000 move-ins. That is incredible. That is such incredible news. And I will tell you, I joined this work. I'm a human rights lawyer by trade. I'm working to advance the right to housing within our network of over 350 organizations and individuals. And we see so many things that are wrong in systems. We hear so much about what needs to be changed, and to hear that there are so many folks on the ground who, despite the challenges of COVID and what people have had to go through, that there have been 10,000 move-ins is a really deeply inspirational thing for my work that I will take to all the grumpy legal advocates that I work with on the ground. I think Marie has spoken to folks potentially about this already, about some of the really big policy things that have happened in the past year or so. And we just had a federal election, as I'm sure everybody knows. We just had a federal election. And what was so interesting about this election is for the first time, housing was on all of the candidates' lips. You saw it come up in leaders' debates. You saw it come up when candidates were talking to their constituents. But most importantly, in political party platforms across all platforms, we saw these different commitments to housing. And the Liberal platform, which of course is the one we're all going to be looking at, considering that they were successful, we see some really exciting things coming that I think potentially could make a lot of big change if we mobilize well behind them. So some things that I see on the horizon are things like the financialization of housing and some big efforts to curb it, right? I won't sugarcoat it. The financialization of housing, the way that real estate investment trusts, the way that financial actors are purchasing up affordable housing and really affecting the affordable or permanent supportive housing stock opportunities is deeply, deeply damaging to people experiencing homelessness and really, really curbing outflow options. And we're going to see hopefully some new commitments to that since those were in the platform. Another one we can expect to see is, for the first time ever, a call that folks have been asking for it seems like forever, for an Indigenous, urban, rural, and northern housing strategy to capture all those folks who don't identify as First Nations, Métis, or Inuit, who aren't captured by the national organizations, who might be, for example, in urban communities. But the piece that I am the most excited about, that might seem the most administrative, is the appointment of a federal housing advocate. So folks might know, if you've heard me talk about the right to housing in these communities, you'll know back in 2019, we saw the passing of the National Housing Strategy Act. And in that act, it was the very, very first commitment from the Government of Canada to recognize the right to housing. And I really want to be clear here too, when I'm talking about the right to housing, I'm certainly talking about it as a rallying cry, as something, an idea, like things like social determinants of health that we can get behind and we all maybe feel in our hearts. But even more than that, it is a substantive legal framework. And we have a lot of advice and information from people within the United Nations, from other countries, about what it means to interpret the right to housing and really make it real. And what's kind of funny about Canada is that even though the covenants we've signed on to, even though if you go way back to the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, you see things like civil and political rights, like the right to vote, freedom of expression, on equal footing as economic, social, and cultural rights, like the right to housing, the right to food. For some reason, even though we've signed on to these covenants, they have equal footing, in Canada, we've really deprioritized the right to housing. And by doing that, we've really deprioritized people experiencing homelessness. And it wasn't really until about, really truly, it wasn't until about 2015, 2017, we saw the appearance of a national housing strategy where, for example, we saw the federal government rejoining the housing scene, recommitting to the housing scene through all kinds of programmatic and policy efforts. And it really is kind of strange that we don't recognize the right to housing in really, really concrete ways for so long, right? There's a lot of other countries that do have ways that people can exercise the right to housing, to hold it in their hands, whether it be through courts or different type of complaints procedures. And it's funny because imagine it was the case for people to access the right to vote or for freedom of expression, right? If we said that you can have the right to freedom of expression or you can have the right to vote, but no one can actually exercise it, that would be a wild idea. And yet that's kind of the way that historically Canada has looked at the right to housing, right? It exists, we believe in it, but you can't access it, especially if you're often a person experiencing homelessness. What would you say to a client who said, how do I access my right to housing? I don't know if there would be much of an answer until very recently and a potential opportunity coming up. I also sometimes get asked, what does the right to housing really mean? When I'm talking about it, does that just mean everybody gets a home, that the government must give everybody a home? No, of course not, right? Just like any other right isn't absolute. Under, in my legal world, we call this a standard of reasonableness, right? We always talk about, what the limits are to a right, what kind of responsibilities come with that right. And so, as folks might know, what this means in Canada is things like the federal government must be committing what we call a maximum of available resources to different types of programmatic efforts related to housing and homelessness. And here is one that we should all be paying a lot of attention to. Under international human rights law, the government of Canada has a priority to immediately address the ending of homelessness. And in international communities, and we've been told this again and again and again by special rapporteurs, by United Nations treaty bodies, that we have a priority as a matter of the right to life, as a matter of the right to housing, to end homelessness. And here you all are on the ground, even despite some of the massive systemic barriers we have in our housing systems. Here you are on the ground, making that happen for at least 10,000 people in your communities across the country. Really what it's truly about at its center, the right to housing is about people. It's about people and identifying their rights and stopping thinking about housing as a privilege, as a commodity, and instead thinking of it as a right. That's what it's really about at the center. And so now that we have a National Housing Strategy Act, this federal housing advocate I'm so excited about, they'll have the opportunity now to receive, once they're appointed, and I will say they are not yet appointed, but they should be appointed in the next 100 days. They'll have an opportunity to receive systemic claims about what's really, really wrong in federal policy. What's wrong that we haven't been able to chip away at yet. And so when they receive those complaints, and it could be about things like a lack of permanent supportive housing funding that just isn't meeting the real gap that we know exists in order to curb move-ins or to be able to address move-ins. It could mean things like a lack of a federal arrears program, right? We know that evictions throughout COVID have been a major, major challenge faced by people in communities, often due to arrears. And there's still a lack of programmatic effort from the federal government to address this from tenants. And we also know that it could mean things like changes to programs like Reaching Home. Even though a lot of communities are getting great funding and great support, there's still things that could be improved with Reaching Home, and some communities who still haven't been able to even get into that system. And so what happens with this is once the federal housing advocate receives submissions on these systemic issues, they'll have the opportunity to investigate and then make recommendations to the Minister of Families, Children, and Social Development. And then he has to respond to that, or she, I apologize, my gosh, he or she or they have to respond to those recommendations within 120 days. And here's what's really strange and exciting. They also have the opportunity to refer those cases to a review panel. And that review panel is made up of 3 members of the National Housing Council, and they're going to hold open hearings. So imagine that. Imagine an open hearing like a courtroom, like a legal setting where we are saying, let us focus on why we don't, what this housing gap really is in affordable and permanent supportive housing stock and how we can address that. So now we need to make it real. And so that means it's important to hear from folks on the ground about what's happening. I will make a shameless plug to say folks are very welcome to join the National Right to Housing Network and share what you're seeing on the ground. What are the big barriers that you think need to be addressed? And in the meantime, I'm going to wish you all the best in the amazing work that you are doing in your community ending homelessness in spite of an incredibly difficult year. So bravo and onward.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I am so hopeful to hear a lot of great changes coming down the pipe. And I encourage communities to continue learning more and get involved in systemic cases or whatever way that you can in order to push forward the right to housing. And so this concludes our pit stop for today. And so I'd like to say lollipop, which essentially means, you have 4 months left to meet your action cycle aims. Everyone can get there. You can do it. Pause and reflect today and take action tomorrow so that you can meet your aims by the end of the action cycle. I'm just going to give you one tiny little bit of fuel to just top up your engines completely. And that is this quote from Margaret Mead: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens with over 667 collective years of experience can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And so onwards, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop, lollipop, oh, lolly, 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 lollipop.